We've entitled this morning's session AML Risk Assessment, the Big Picture. And in the time that we've got, just the 20 minutes or so, all we can do is introduce or just give an overview of a hugely important topic for firms. Some of you will know risk and AML risk and how firms respond to that is very much in the news at the moment. And so what we're going to do in this short session is just to give you an overview of a topic that when I often am delivering on the training on this subject to clients, both in Europe, but also in Dubai and that part of the region, we often spend an hour, 2 hours unpacking this with staff, with compliance teams. So it's a subject we could spend a lot more time digging into. But we are just going to pick out some of the key issues and some of the things that we know that people need to be aware of and that sometimes people find difficult. Obviously, for some of you, if you're very familiar with this area, it'll be a refresher. But for others of you, there may be one or two things that are new and just will help to give you a greater sense of how your firm needs to respond to this issue. But rather than me do all the talking, we're going to start out with a quick question. And here's that question. How confident are you that your firm has a comprehensive and up-to-date AML business risk assessment that meets all regulatory requirements? So, not at all confident, reasonably confident, very confident. I have no knowledge of my firm's AML risk assessment. What you're going to see in a moment, that question should come up in front of you on your screen. It is anonymous. So all we're looking to do is just to get a feel from the group. What's your sense right now of your firm's AML business risk assessment? So that question should now be opening for you. I'm just going to give you a few moments to respond to that. Hopefully we'll get some votes in. As I say, it is anonymous, so please don't feel that any of you are going to be picked up and questioned about your particular risk assessment. It's simply to get a feel from across the whole group. And I'll give you a last few seconds. About half of you voted so far, so do click through. Give you a last few seconds. Okay, that's okay. I'm going to show you the results, which actually are very interesting. Given the mixed group that we've got for a range of different firms that you're from and from different regulatory contexts. But here are the results. So we had someone saying actually not at all confident. The most common answer, reasonably confident. It's an interesting one, isn't it? Yes, you're hopefully feeling as though you've got some awareness of what it is and some hope that it's right. 3 of you very confident, which is interesting. Again, you may well feel yes, you've got a good handle on this area and you know that you've got everything in place. Interestingly, none of you saying I don't have any knowledge. All of you having some awareness, at least, of your AML business risk assessment. Okay. So let's just start with a very quick overview of the basic obligation around risk-based AML. Many of you, of course, will be familiar with the Financial Action Task Force, or FATF, an international body which makes recommendations to governments on how to tackle money laundering and terrorist financing. And back in 2014, when it published its most recent guidance, it talks about banking, but also it applies to asset managers and commodities sector, essentially any financial services firm. Financial institutions, it says, are expected to identify, assess, and understand the risks to which they're exposed and take measures which are commensurate or proportionate to those risks. It went on to say, and I thought this was particularly interesting, that firms should analyze those risks and seek to understand how they affect them. And that's the thing that I think I want to perhaps particularly draw out over the time that we've got, is this is a process about thinking, okay, I understand what some of the key risk areas are, but also I've done the work of thinking, how do they actually affect us as an institution? How do they affect us as a firm? And that is then the basis for everything else that we do in terms of AML controls, in terms of AML due diligence measures, all of those other steps that we're going to put in place. So that's the high-level picture from the Financial Action Task Force. Let's just pause for a moment just to make one really important distinction. Because there are two areas of risk here that we need to be aware of. We're going to focus on one of them just because of time. And it's this distinction between business risk and customer risk. Now, in my experience, working with firms, both here in the UK, but also in Dubai and across the region, my experience is that people tend to be more familiar with the risk here on the right, customer risk assessment, which focuses on specific client relationships. Most people that I talk to when I'm working with banks or asset managers or others in Dubai and in the region are familiar with the idea that we risk assess individual client relationships, that we think about the level of due diligence and the level of ongoing monitoring in the context of those relationships. But I find in the firms that I work in much less familiarity with business risk assessment, the one on the left here. This is about looking at the business activities as a whole. And it's this risk assessment that we're using to calibrate our AML controls, to target our resources. And it's this that we're going to focus on in the time that we've got this morning. Now, I'm not going to go through this line by line, but just to give you just some reassurance, I've shown you the FATF guidance, the Financial Action Task Force guidance. The UAE federal guidance, again, reinforces this. Financial institutions are expected to identify and understand the risks to which they're exposed. It allows institutions to allocate their resources more efficiently, to adopt preventative measures that are targeted and proportionate with the nature of the risks that they face. And for those of you in the DIFC, I know there's quite a number on the call this morning who are within the DIFC. And again, you'll know the DFSA has its own rule book on this. That sets out, again, the need, the expectation for firms to understand those risks and take a proportionate approach in mitigating those risks. Interestingly, the DFSA goes on to say a couple of really quite important things, that risk assessment should be objective, based on reasonable grounds, not just, for example, taken off the shelf or adopted from another firm. You should be doing this as a careful exercise of thought and consideration as to what are the risks, how do they actually affect us, and then of course documenting that and reviewing it. You know, risks change. We're seeing that right now. The issue of COVID-19 has just brought that to the fore, how AML risks change significantly over time. And so that's why this is an iterative process. What we do is we do a risk assessment, but we review it. And we review it not only within a compliance or AML context, but senior managers, boards should be reviewing and actually confirming, yes, actually, we believe that this captures the risk associated with our organization. Now, I've done all the talking so far. It's going to be over to you for just 2 minutes. Because of the time we have, that's all you have. But what I'm going to ask you to do is consider this question. What do you consider to be the most important risk categories to consider when assessing a firm's AML risk exposure? But I'm not going to ask you to do it, not in isolation on your own. I'm going to put you into some groups. And this is something that we do often on these sessions, just to allow people to interact. And so what I've done very quickly is just put you into groups of 4. So hopefully what you should find is that you're in a group with 1 or 2, 3 other people. I'm just making sure that's all ready. In just one moment, what you'll get is a link that will ask you to click through to a breakout room. And what you'll find is you're on the call with 2, 3, maybe 4 other people. All I'd like you to do is just take one moment to see if between you can come up with a list of those categories. What are those most important risk categories to consider? Okay, so they're now open for you. Do click through, please, if you've got the opportunity to do that, just to join that room. And I'll give you a moment or 2 to do that. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Hopefully you are all back now from those breakout rooms. couple of reasons for doing that. Firstly, just give you the chance to talk with somebody else rather than just listen to me for 20 minutes, but also just to give you a chance to share a couple of ideas and just illustrate how on a session like this, even though we're not sitting around in a room together, actually there is the chance still to share some thoughts and ideas. Okay, those risk categories then. Hopefully you came up with a list, or at least in your groups you were able to come up with the 2 or 3 ideas. Let's briefly run through some of the most important categories or factors we need to consider. Now, what you'll find if you look at different regulators is that they have slightly different ways of expressing these. These are taken from the UAE federal guidelines. And I'm going to briefly just mention something about each of them. So, customers. Now, again, absolutely crucial that we appreciate this is about not specific client relationships, but the type of customer. And so it's around thinking, okay, who are our firm's customers? What is the client base? Are there parts of the business that have a different client base? Secondly, geographic. Now, again, this is one that we would spend much more time unpacking in another session if we had the time, but it's one of the most challenging for firms. It's thinking around not just where are we physically located in the DIFC or in Dubai or in Abu Dhabi, but actually what's our footprint? What are we exposed to through our activity and our customers' business activity? What about the products and services and transactions that we provide? Now, again, I think one of the main ways that people can get to grips with this is just asking that question that I've put there. How might they facilitate money laundering? And the reason for asking that question, of course, is that we are used to thinking all of our customers, of course, are using these products and services for legitimate reasons. But to understand the risks, asking that question, well, how could what we do actually facilitate money laundering? How do we deliver client services to our clients? Oh, is that face-to-face? Is it online? Is it intermediated? Clearly, there's much greater risk where the way that we deliver services to clients offers some level of anonymity. And then lastly, and this is really interesting, and if you haven't seen this in the guidance yet, it's actually, I found it really interesting that they included this. The idea of novelty or innovation risk. You know, as we do new things, as we launch new products and services, as we take on new types of client, what are we thinking about the risks associated with those? Now, of course, all of this we do on the basis that we need to be proportionate. And the Financial Action Task Force has been very clear. Look, if you're a simple firm, you maybe provide a certain limited range of products to a certain type of client, then of course a simple risk assessment might be sufficient. But of course, if you're a larger firm, if you're providing a wider range of services, and if there are multiple types of client that you have, your risk assessment will be more sophisticated as a result. Very quick illustration of this just as we come towards the end. So for example, for a simple firm, we may have something as simple as this, where we've simply captured each of those risks. Of course, if we were offering multiple services, we may need to be streaming our risk assessment to consider those various risks. And I could continue. You hopefully take the point. It's about understanding at a reasonably granular level, what are the risks that are posed to us and to our business. Now, a final point then, just in conclusion, what's the purpose of all of this? And I've said we've touched on it. It's a subject we could expand, and maybe for another day we'll come back in another session and look at one or two of these in a lot more detail. But hopefully you've understood the point. It has been just to remind us of some of the major areas of risks facing our organizations. And what's the point? That in response, we allocate our resources, that we act in a way that is proportionate. We move from our risk assessment, we design our controls, and then we monitor and review how those controls are managing the AML risk that we are exposed to. Now, just before we close, you'll see this question and you'll recognize it. I'm just going to give you one more chance to respond. Some of you weren't here when we looked at this first time around. Others of you, possibly your view might have changed. I'm just give you a few seconds just to respond to that question. Okay, I'm just watching as the votes are coming in. I'm going to give you last couple of seconds. 2/3 of you have voted so far. Let's just give you a last couple of seconds. Okay, it's interesting. It's really interesting because results have definitely changed. Let me show them to you. Actually, people feeling more confident, which is great. 7 of you saying actually, yeah, very confident. Others of you reasonably confident. So again, in the time that we've had, hopefully what we've done is just be able to give you an overview of some of the issues that risk assessment involves. I hope you feel it's been worthwhile. I hope you've found it helpful. If there's anything else that we can do to help, please do get in touch with us. Get in touch with your usual contact at CCL or with me. You're very welcome to get in touch with me via LinkedIn or whatever else, because we'd be very happy to help if we can.